I'm speaking with Dr. Josef Joffe. Dr. Joffe is editor and publisher of Die Zeit, which is Germany's most widely read weekly. He's considered an expert on the Middle East as well as on international security issues, and his articles have appeared in many publications, including the New York Review of Books, the New York Times Magazine, Commentary, and the Weekly Standard. He's a senior fellow at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University, and also the Abramowitz Fellow at the Hoover Institution. His most recent book is called Uberpower, The Imperial Temptation of America. Dr. Joffe was raised in West Berlin during the Cold War, came to America to study, and has a PhD in government from Harvard University.
And I now teach American foreign policy at Stanford.
So we know that you're extremely well informed, and I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about American foreign policy.
Okay.
But let's start with the Middle East.
Yep.
The Arab-Israeli conflict seems to take up a huge amount of the world's attention, even though there are lots of other conflicts going on at the same time that have much higher casualty counts. Everybody seems to be obsessed with this conflict. Why is this conflict so much more prominent?
Well, I beg to differ on the premise. What you just said was right for many years and decades, but I think in recent times the so-called Middle East conflicts, which they mean the Israeli-Arab one, has almost shrunk to a sideshow. It is shrinking to the level onto which it belongs. Why? Because the stage on which it unfolds has become so much bigger. We're now no longer talking about that narrow strip of land between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean, which is what, 20 kilometers or something. The stage now goes from Beirut to Kandahar, from Lebanon to Afghanistan, from the Kurdish border in the north of Iraq down to the Gulf. And the real interesting Middle Eastern conflicts have nothing to do with the Arab-Palestinian Israeli conflict. It has to do with Iranian hegemonial ambitions. It has to do with oil, the strategic resource of the First Order. It has to do with half a dozen clashes with a serious potential between states, between religions, between sects.
So this is just one conflict among many?
Yes.
Now, many people on the Arab side say that the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is the key to everything else. Until that's solved, nothing else can be solved.
Well, I think it's a familiar line, but I don't agree with that line, because I can think of as I said, half a dozen conflicts in the neighborhood which have nothing to do with Israel and the Palestinians. And think about Iran trying to extend its power. Think about the real serious wars in that neighborhood were not between Israel and its neighbors. The worst war and the longest war was between Iran and Iraq in the 1980s, which claimed, a million or two casualties.
But Iran is now saying that Israel is its principal enemy. It has no higher goal than getting rid of Israel.
But this is, again, we have to distinguish between the propaganda line and the reality. The conflict is between the Shia and the Sunni, between Iran's hegemonic ambitions and the fear of the Sunni states, most of whom are quasi-American allies like Saudi Arabia. If you go back 50 or 60 years all the way, you see that the area was rent by a myriad conflicts which have very little to do with the Arab-Israeli conflict. I mean, what does the several hundred thousand dead in Algeria, in the civil war in Algeria, have to do with Israel?
Now, from the standpoint of American foreign policy, what is America's interest in all these conflicts? What does America hope to accomplish in the region for itself?
Well, I give you a kind of general answer. America is the global power, and it naturally has to care about what's happening in the world. And what Europe was in the 20th century, the major arena of conflict, the Middle East is in the 21st century. That is where the most explosive potential is piled up. That's where the highest number of conflicts are, And that's where the stakes are the highest, which has to do with regional domination, with strategic resources like oil, with the strategic arena of the First Order, where 3 continents are joined. And so naturally, if you are the global power, you're going to take a great deal of interest in what's happening there. This is not Papua Guinea or even New Zealand.
Now, I know that oil is a big interest because oil is the lifeblood of the modern industrial economy, and we want to keep that flowing. But is that the only issue? Or, I mean, are there other issues driving all these conflicts?
What are you driving at?
Well, there's several things that people are fighting for.
Yeah.
There's dominance, to dominate and not be dominated.
Right.
There are religious conflicts,
Right.
there are territorial conflicts,
Right.
there are a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to kind of isolate all these factors and figure out the
I don't think
importance
you
of each
can.
one.
I mean, well, some you can. I mean, look, there is one thing that's going on is an age-old Syrian quest for domination of Lebanon, which it calls part of Greater Syria. That is one conflict. It's a semi-hegemonic conflict. Then there's a claim of Iran to run the whole neighborhood. That's a hegemonial conflict. Then there's Iran's quest for nuclear weapons, something that can potentially turn into a global conflict. Then you have the civilizational conflict between Shia and Sunni, which arrays Sunni states against the dominant Shia state. What else do we want? You'll have, if the Iranians get the bomb, then others will follow. The Saudis and the Egyptians will build the bomb. You have Pakistan, which is an explosion waiting to happen, the most dangerous country in the world, I would think. Again, to come back to an earlier issue, Pakistan's pathologies have very little to do with Israel, it seems to me. If Israel disappeared from the map, Pakistan would still be the most dangerous state in the neighborhood, and Iran would still be going after nuclear weapons, and Iran would still be trying to impose hegemony and try to kick out the United States.
So do we have a situation in the Middle East that if it truly gets out of control, could be extremely damaging to the United States? I mean, we're looking at something...
To the world. I mean, Iranian nuclear weapons aren't just... Look, Iranian nuclear weapons are not going to reach the United States as long as all of us live. It's going to take a long time. But the Iranian nuclear weapons can destroy Israel, it can intimidate Saudi Arabia, it can intimidate Egypt.
So do you think we should do anything to try to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons?
We should try to do everything to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons, because I think we have to take seriously when he talks about eradicating Israel from the map. And when he talks about, and when Khomeini earlier talked about, so we lose 20 million people, but Israel won't exist anymore. So what Khomeini indicates that the normal logic of mutual deterrence, which kept the peace between the Soviet Union and America for 40 years, may not work. So we're talking about some very serious thing here.
Some people have suggested that the United States, with or without Israel's help, attack Iran, but that has problems also. If you're the one who strikes the first blow, not necessarily for the correct reasons, you could find yourself in a bigger mess than you were expecting, like in Iraq, for example.
Well, I think Iraq was winning against Saddam's army was probably a cakewalk compared to the strategic, tactical issues of destroying Iran's nuclear capability. There's only one nation that can do it, the United States. Israel can't do it. All you have to do is to look at the map, look at the distances, and then look at what Israel has to offer to throw into the battle.
For Israel to destroy for the United States to destroy Iran's nuclear capability, can it just knock out the capability, or does it have to overthrow the whole regime?
I was going to get to this. So, anybody who thinks it's just kind of an afternoon worth of flying, where we hit 5, 10, 20 nuclear sites, is grievously wrong. This is a very, very serious campaign which would have to consist of at least 4 parts. And we're talking about major, major war. The first wave would have to take out Iranian air defenses. The second wave would have to take out all of its naval assets on the Gulf with which it could threaten oil traffic in the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. then you would want to take out all their refining capabilities. As you know, they import about half their refined products from abroad, so you want to take out the rest to make sure that the Iranian economy grinds to a halt tomorrow. And then finally you want to attack a lot of targets, some of whom we don't know where they're located, some of whom are located in densely populated neighborhoods. So we're talking about a very major campaign which would involve 1,000 planes and more. So it's not, like what the Israelis did in '81, just hit one reactor and go back. Which has, as your question indicated, is fraught with a lot of risks. I mean, when the bombing starts, I don't know where the oil price will go. 200, 300, 400? I don't know.
Can they counterattack us? Do we expose ourselves?
Well,
to
then there is something which is a serious threat. I mean, the Iranians, unlike Saddam, really did and continue to sponsor global terrorism. They're very experienced in doing it. They're extremely ruthless. They started right after the revolution, killing the Shah's politicians in Paris and in Berlin, what have you. They unleashed terror as far away as Buenos Aires, the Jewish community center there. So there would be a serious terrorist threat, in addition to everything else I've said. And in conclusion, I don't think that, as a result, I don't think anybody's going to attack Iran. And your next question is going to be, what are we going to do about the bomb?
Once they have it.
Once they have it, we have to rely on the old nuclear deterrence game.
Mutual assured destruction, or MAD, as
well,
it was called.
It will not be mutual assured destruction. I mean, Iran cannot destroy the United States, but the United States can destroy Iran, 100 times over. The U.S. has at this point 2,250 strategic nuclear warheads, each of which is a multiple of the explosive power that destroyed Hiroshima. And for the time being, Iran cannot hit the United States.
Now, Iran is saying that it basically wants to bring an end to Western civilization altogether, which it claims is decadent and corrupt. Do we have any reason to think that they don't mean it?
Look, if you're a political scientist like me, you believe in certain kind of rationalities. And therefore, for you, intention or ideology or rhetoric is just one indication of what a nation is going to do. The more important thing is to look at the means. Hitler talked the talk, but he also walked the walk, because by 1939 he had the most powerful army in the world, next maybe to the Russian army, and the U.S. hadn't gotten to the act yet. So in his case, you talk and you walk, and then you know you have a real problem. As to Iran, I know that their rhetoric is as bloodthirsty as the Nazi rhetoric was, but luckily they do not have a military option which is global or maybe even regional, except if they had a bomb, they could really lob a bomb on Israel. But don't forget, Israel could respond with about 200 in turn.
Now, they do also glorify suicide martyrdom.
Yes.
Once people say, we're going to conquer the world or die trying, there's not much room to negotiate.
No, there's not much room to negotiate to begin with, but look, the people who send terrorist squads abroad, like Hamas, are not the same people who die in a suicide attack. Somebody else who does the dying. So whether somebody like Ahmadinejad or his power structure is really willing to die, I don't know. I assume they're human beings, and to be a human being means that you have an instinct for self-preservation. But I grant the point, there are some people who love to die because of the life thereafter, etc. But again, if you force me, I would put more emphasis on the means, which they have or don't have, than on the rhetoric.
Let's go back to Israel and the Palestinians. If you want to solve a problem, you have to start by asking the right questions. For
Correct.
many years now, people have been asking, how can we achieve peace between Israel and the Palestinians? Is that the right question, or should we be asking a different question?
What do you think is the right question? I don't know. I mean, look, peace between A and B is always a good thing. It certainly is a good thing in that neighborhood where Israelis and Palestinians have been torturing each other for the last 50 years.
But not every conflict has a peaceful solution.
This is true.
And this may be one of those.
I think so. Peace is a good thing, especially in that neighborhood. Which is essentially a 100-year war, and the Palestinians do not have a nice life. Have you ever been to the territories?
Yeah.
Have you ever tried to maneuver those roadblocks, etc., etc.? It's not. If you sit on the other side, I almost got shot by an Israeli soldier in Ramallah when I got stuck in a raid, which the Israelis were just conducting. I said, gee, that's something new. What it feel like to face power, and fear. I mean, this 19-year-old who was raising his M16 was afraid. Anyway, so I think it's a good idea to have peace. But what you're asking is this: can the conflict be solved?
Well, there's two sides
correct
to want peace. Now, the Palestinians, as far as I can tell, train their children for war.
Yeah.
Every Palestinian school child is taught from kindergarten up that the noblest thing he could aspire to is to become a suicide bomber and kill himself while taking as many Jews with him.
There's a frightful, almost obscene asymmetry. You only look at, the map that the Fatah published on the day after of Annapolis. There was no Israel on that map. It was just Palestine. And everything you say is true. Generations of Palestinian children are raised in hatred and murderous lust, if you wish, which Israelis are not. I mean, the Israelis have come around to look at it from the other point of view. They now speak about the suffering of the Palestinians, as S.O.T.M.E did, and Annapolis, and all that. Okay, I grant you that. Meanwhile, you know what the other side of the problem is. There's terror. There are missiles, and the Israelis and the Palestinians are intermingling in one political space, and you know what's going to happen. Pretty soon the Arabs are going to have a majority, and then finito with a Jewish state. So I think separation and peace is a good thing for both sides, if it can be done.
Now, for years, people have been touting the idea of the two-state solution, a Jewish state and a Palestinian state living side by side. That assumes that once the Palestinian state is established, it will no longer have any reason to attack Israel and it will live in peace. Based on the Palestinians' performance up until now, do you think there's any basis for that assumption?
Look, if you look at Gaza, after the withdrawal reduces the old Oslo idea of peace, land for peace ad absurdum. It was land for war. Okay. Meanwhile, I'm looking at other indices. I'm looking at the fact that Israel has concluded a peace with Egypt and with Jordan, and it has held in spite of everything. I'm looking at Olmert and Abbas, who are a very different duo than, say, Sharon and Barak with Arafat. Arafat could have made peace, but he didn't want to. Now, Abbas could, I think, wants it, but may not be able to make peace. Nonetheless, for an Israeli and a Palestinian leader to call each other friends, if we had predicted that even 5 years ago, we would have been laughed out of court. So my point here, and very briefly, is one has to look at not just at the downside of everything, which is easy to do in the Middle East, but look how certain things have been changing.
But even if, say, the Arab side says that it wants peace, like Mahmoud Abbas himself, who both the United States and Israel are trying to essentially prop him up as an alternative to Hamas. He has said very clearly on many occasions that he's not going to make peace with Israel unless he gets an independent state with Jerusalem as its capital, which is a no-go for most Israelis, and until Arab refugees get the right of return into Israel proper, which is no-go for almost all Israelis.
Abbas knows that. He knows it. And as far as East Jerusalem is concerned, look, nobody goes to East Jerusalem anymore. I remember 15 years ago in the 80s, I used to travel to the West Bank. I used to go to East Jerusalem, buy Arab coffee on Saladin Street at a place called Kit Kat, or one used to go there to change money. Nobody goes there anymore. The city has been redivided. De facto, it's been redivided, and the land has been redivided because no Israeli in his right mind would travel to the West Bank these days, as they would have 10, 15 years ago, before the first Intifada. So there is de facto some of the pieces of a peace are in place. And let me divulge another not such secret. Right now, Abbas knows that he cannot dispense with Israeli troops on the West Bank. They don't want the Israelis to leave.
Because Hamas would run them out of town.
Well, then you see what happened. Israelis left Gaza and bingo.
But the whole purpose of the Oslo Agreement, signed in the 90s, was for Israel to bring these allegedly former terrorists into the heart of the land of Israel, so they would suppress real terrorist groups like Hamas without having to worry about the niceties of the Israeli courts. Now, if Israel has to prop up Abbas, well, what good is he?
All I'm saying is that sometimes even in the Middle East, which is the most ornery, most pathological political system in the world, things sometimes look up. And the fact that, there is now an implicit alliance between Israel, the Israeli army, and the leader or half-leader of the Palestinians, to me is almost like a miracle. And I know you're not going to turn this into a blossoming peace, but amidst all the perversity, these are the kind of unexpected things that I couldn't even have dreamt of while Yasser Arafat was alive.
But what benefit does Israel get from this alliance? What does Abbas give to Israel?
Well, the idea would be to have them build a state. That state builds an economy. That economy offers hope and jobs and a future to the next generations of kids and students, so they don't go to the terrorists.
Based on their past performance in Gaza, for example.
I understand. Gaza is, if you think that all of reality, that the main reality of the Middle East is Gaza, then you might just well pick up stakes and leave. You wouldn't want to live in this kind of neighborhood where Gazas take place, where people don't even obey their own basic interests. Like, I mean, imagine if they had played it right in 2005.
Israel had, or
no, the Palestinians. The EU and the US stood ready to shower them with billions. They were ready to build them ports and invest and build them airports and turn it into kind of economic zones, enterprise zones, you name it. They could have had it all. And they went against their own interests.
Is that because their hatred of Jews exceeds their desire to...
I'm just telling you, if you think that the reality of the Middle East is exhausted by Gaza, then I guess, pick up and go. Go to Australia, go to the United States. It's a hellhole beyond any kind of rational hope.
On the other hand, Israel...
But therefore you have to look at some of the other things which indicate to you, as I tried to say in the last 5 minutes, how sometimes things do change for the better.
Okay. It's not clear to me what's been changing for the better. Now, Israel has exercised an enormous amount of restraint.
Correct.
It's not going after Hamas with the full force of its army.
Correct.
It's releasing Arab prisoners, even though the Arabs have not released the Israeli prisoners that they hold.
Correct.
Do you think that Israel's policy of making one-sided concessions helps the situation, or maybe it makes it worse because it emboldens the terrorists, convinces them that terrorism works, that it achieves its goals?
The point is, the issue is, sometimes you make concessions as a down payment on the future, and you want to make sure that these are concessions that you can take back. So, of course, Israel could march into Gaza tomorrow, and there are plans to do so if they keep escalating. However, the costs of ruling Gaza again do not look very attractive to me.
Letting it be a terrorist missile launching base doesn't look too good either.
Can't be done. So this is a neighborhood where you have to be grateful for small things. But if you ask the way you ask, which is a kind of yes or no, either or, they do this, and why do we have to do this? And why do we give 10 prisons, they don't even give one? You're not going to get anywhere because you're right. I mean, why should anybody give 10 prisoners and not even receive one? The Middle East plays by different rules, and you hope that you can set something in motion at the same time that you can take these things back, that you don't accept, that you don't go into deadly risks for yourself. Listen, smarter people than you and me have tried to get a solution in one fell swoop. The man's name is Clinton. He failed miserably.
I thought it was his most frequent guest at the White House.
He tried to do the one big ball of wax kind of solution. It didn't work.
So does that imply that for Israel, it's basically a war, and their two choices are winning or losing? They're not going to settle it diplomatically because the Arabs are committed to its destruction.
But wait a minute. Again, think about, amidst all this mishuggais, if you wish, think about the fact that since '78, for 30 years now, there has been peace with the strongest and most dangerous power in the neighborhood, Egypt. It survived several incursions into Lebanon. It survived two Iraq wars. They don't love each other, and it's a very cold peace, but there's peace. I mean, this counts for nothing. Think about Jordan. This counts for nothing. Deep in their hearts, do they want to destroy Israel? Perhaps. But right now, I have to look at the facts on the ground, and I think they're kind of encouraging, no?
But can these be reversed? Like, let's say...
Yes, of course it can be reversed. The Egyptians could attack tomorrow.
Let's say Egypt had democratic elections and the Muslim Brotherhood won, and they said, this treaty doesn't bind us.
Yep.
We're back at war.
Well, they'll probably, even crazy Islamists will look at the order of battle, and they'll look what Israel has, and they'll look what Egypt has, and they ask themselves, so what if we go to war? What do we get out of this? Martyrdom? 72 virgins? That's not the way statesmen or politicals think. They do think in terms of interest and costs. So why would Egypt attack Israel? Tell me. They've gotten what they wanted. They have gotten back to Sinai.
Well, is there a prestige fact, like everybody wants to be the new Saladin, the great hero by defeating, the hated adversary?
Could be. You're asking all kinds of questions which have the answer. Yes, could be. It's possible. Is it likely? No. Is the task of politics to deal only with what's possible? Well, you have to buy insurance, but in the meantime, let's worry about what is likely and what is less likely. That's how realpolitik works.
Now, is this purely a physical struggle where might makes right, or is there some kind of struggle of ideas? There's some principles or values or ideals being fought for here?
Well, you look at the neighborhood and you see on one side this one lonely democracy, which has remained a democracy in spite of everything. And none of us would have bet 50, 60 years ago that Israel would remain a democracy, given the constant deadly pressure on it. We would have all predicted it's going to turn to a garrison state with a kind of military dictatorship. So that's democracy. The rest is not. It's despotisms of varying kind. There is also an ideology called Islam, which doesn't seem to be perfectly equipped to deal with modernity. There's a certain radical nature to political Islam, at least political Islam we can observe, which doesn't seem to be terribly interested in living side by side with members of opposing faiths. Yes, so there's a struggle of ideas. The struggle of ideas you have in every major European city these days, where you have a sizable Muslim minority. It starts with parents coming to school and saying, "We can't serve pork here." They say, "No, we don't want our girls to take part in co-ed gym classes. No, our girls are not going to go on a field trip." So that struggle is taking place everywhere in the Western world, and I can only wish that it's a struggle that stays in the kind of talking stage, rather than in the stage where they start throwing bombs they did in Madrid and London. So yes, we have a problem. We have a problem with the resurgent ideological Islam, with its expansive notion of its own worth and its own self.
Now, what do we have to combat that?
Well, we have something called democracy and liberalism and rational thinking, and we have our values, which we cherish, I assume. I certainly cherish them. I will not let go of coeducational schooling.
Now, the U.S. has been trying to export Western liberal democratic values to the Middle East, in the idea that if only we could get those countries to be Western-style democracies, things will be all right. Is it possible to do that? I mean, don't you need certain pre-existing cultural conditions for that?
Look, let's put it this. So we know from our own history, we, the West, that we were just as bloodthirsty and cruel toward non-believers, or those we thought weren't quite of the right faith, be they Orthodox or Catholic or Protestant, and we spent about 200 years decimating each other, burning each other on the stake, and drowning each other, and so on. So we went through a very wrenching experience before we came to the point where we said separation of state and church, freedom of individual conscience, freedom of thought, freedom from the state, etc. So you're right when you express your doubts that you can't just take what took us 200, 300 years, flanked as it was by industrial revolution, by the Renaissance and the Reformation and what have you, and the ideas of liberalism, and impose that on a culture which has experienced nothing but despotic rule all the way to the beginnings of humanity.
And they don't take kindly to foreigners very much either.
They certainly don't. So the idea that you can somehow foreshorten several hundred years of development in one quick little war is a bit of hubris. On the other hand, what are we going to do 5 years from now? Let's assume that. Let's assume the war in Iraq finally does go right. Let's assume that will be, as there are many signs right now, it will be not a lily-white democracy, but it will be a reasonably tolerable and tolerant state with reasonable rule of law, with reasonable democratic representation, remember they went to the polls in the middle of the war and defied terrorism and everything. And let's assume there will be suddenly an Arab state in the middle of it all that has some of these features, and there will be more of a rule of law, more democratic than, say, Putin's Russia. It could happen.
Yeah. I don't see it happening easily,
then,
but...
imagine what goes at 10 years from now, how we look at George W. Right now, I think, he engaged in a very foolish war. Very foolish war.
Well, it's not clear exactly who we have to defeat in Iraq to win, because there are many different factions that are at war with each other, so we have trouble even defining who we're fighting.
Well, the war has too many front lines, it's true. We don't quite know who the enemy is. But the fact is that in the last 6 or 9 months, the news hasn't been all bad, let's put it very cautiously. And the reason, I think, is that the Sunnis put everything on this one big bet, the insurgency. They lost that bet. Same time the U.S. opened up to the Sunnis, we assured them, you'll get a place in Iraq, in a federalized Iraq, you'll get all revenues. We will no longer treat you as enemies. And I think that is the single most important factor that explains these widening islands of security, plus a windfall, plus the oil price. You know, when in 03, where was oil in 03? $30, $40? Today it's 100. That means $5, $6, $7 billion a year into the Iraqi kitty, and that money is trickling down. And suddenly,
is it trickling down? I hear that most of it is being stolen by people at the top.
that's what the New York Times writes, which has no other bad news to report. But you just go to Baghdad airport. Those Royal Jordanian airplanes used to fly out packed with refugees and come back empty. Now it's the other way around. Now they fly out empty to Amman and come back packed with returnees.
Now, is this insurgency?
But anyway, these are just, straws in the wind, but they're more and more straws.
But maybe the insurgents are just lying low, waiting out the Americans until they leave, and then they'll go at it, because a lot of Sunnis feel, well, we were a minority, and we oppressed the Shiites. Now, there is no way that we're going to allow the Shiites to dominate us, and we don't care about any elections or any democratic process, because we know that if they're in charge, they're going to oppress us.
Yeah, no, that's what motivated the original insurgency. They tried for 3 years and it didn't work. And now I think they're ready for some accommodation, as the U.S. and the Shia government is ready for accommodation with the Sunnis. Look, again, you keep asking me yes, no, dyadic questions, black, white, red, green. And I'm saying you have to look at the mix of news, and all I'm saying is that the mix of news has turned from mainly bad to a lot better. And the reason, I gave you the reasons, which is they put everything on this bet. They lost the bet. The U.S. opened up. The Shia government has used enormous restraint. They could have killed them a long time ago, And they had lots of good reason to kill them, and these Sunnis were blowing up Shia mosques. And we have to say something nice about the Maliki government and the Mahdi army and what have you. They're showing enormous restraint, which is quite unbelievable given the bloodthirstiness of that neighborhood. So it says we have to be grateful for the good things.
All things?
Yes.
Okay, I'll buy that. Whatever good news we could get, we'll take that. Now, you also have the jihadists, and they're a minority perhaps.
2,000, no more.
But in many countries in the Middle East, they seem to be in the ascendancy. Apparently,
which countries?
Well, certainly the Palestinian territories.
Hamas, yes.
Egypt, I think they're pretty strong in Egypt. They've been suppressed.
They've been strong for 60 years, and some of them don't quite make it.
They're in Jordan.
Jordan has been sitting in a powder keg. It's the most stable regime in the neighborhood.
Lebanon, Hezbollah.
Lebanon is the one place which is a witch's cauldron.
Okay, and that's right next door to Israel. The government can't really do much without Hezbollah, which is closely tied to Iran and Syria.
In the end, what will happen, a very cynical thing is going to happen, not today, not tomorrow, but the rest of the world would tacitly accord to Syria again a kind of droit de seigneur on oversight over Iran, over Lebanon, on the correct assumption it's better to have Syria run Lebanon than Hezbollah and Iran. It's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but over the next 5 years, that's what's going to happen.
Lebanon is one of the few Arab countries that has a very substantial Christian percentage. For a number of years, there was
most of them now live in this country.
Christian majority. That's no longer the case.
Yeah.
So does it look like after Syria gets through with Lebanon, there will be no Christian majority places anywhere in the Middle East?
There was, but there is no Christian majority anymore. Hasn't been for a long time. The reason why war broke out in '75, civil war broke out, was because the demographic balance had changed, and the Shia had become more numerous than the Christians. Most of them live in the United States now.
Now Hezbollah is threatening Israel.
Yep.
They fought a war with them last year. What's your take on the outcome of last year's war in Lebanon? Most people thought that Israel did not accomplish what it needed to accomplish, and therefore it lost.
I have two takes on that one. One is, I think Israel, by its behavior, seriously enhanced its deterrence. Why? If I were an Arab potentate, I said, Jesus, these guys unleashed a whole war because of 2 kidnapped soldiers. We better lay off these guys. They're really irrational and dangerous. They're really crazy, and you lay off crazy people. That's what we call this deterrence. That was good for, strategically speaking, for Israel. And no Air Force general in Egypt or Syria makes the mistake of thinking that the Israelis have lost that war.
But it didn't end in a clear-cut victory.
That's one take. The other take is that an enormously incompetent civilian leadership, Defense Minister Peretz, plus an extremely badly trained and prepared army, mainly reservists, who ran out of water and ammo, and a confused military leadership which would give one order now and rescind it 2 hours later, which did large damage to Lebanon without seriously decimating Hezbollah. So in terms of deterrence, victory. In terms of the land battle, a draw. Third and last point, the Israelis are not going to make that mistake again. They had not practiced insurgency warfare in years and years.
They won't make the mistake of attacking, or they won't make the mistake of not winning a decisive victory.
They will not bumble again. They will no longer install incompetent leadership at the top, and they have been practicing counterinsurgency warfare like fiends since the summer of 1906. They hadn't prepared for that kind of war. They were only worried about keeping order and stability in the West Bank and Gaza. That's what they were extremely prepared to do, but they had not practiced that. And believe me, as we sit here, they're practicing 24/7.
But some people say that Israel is actually losing its will to fight under the current government. It keeps making concessions. Its response to most Arab threats is to pull back.
Like where?
Well, they already pulled back from Gaza. Now they're talking about evacuating the entire West Bank. There's hundreds of thousands of people there.
They will not evacuate the West Bank.
But they're claiming that that is their intention.
I haven't even read anybody say that. I haven't heard anybody say that. And not even the most wild-eyed Haaretz editorialist, which is a left-wing paper, is pushing these ideas. They've lost the will to fight.
Well, like for example, in Hebron, there's a very small Jewish community there.
Yeah.
They're actively discouraged from being there. The government is always trying to kick them out. Yeah. It's very difficult conditions. They don't really give them much protection.
Look, come on. The whole country is being held hostage by about 40 people who live in Hebron and require several battalions to protect them. What kind of rationality is that? And what is that? God tells us to do this? God tells the Israeli government that you have to use several battalions in place to protect 40 of these people? I mean, come on. There has to be some reality in the way we conduct policy. I would pull these guys out in 5 minutes from now because they damaged the Israeli national interest. What interest is being served by these people?
Well, that goes to a question of who has the right to be where.
If I have claimed that right to be somewhere, and then I ask my government, you have to provide a battalion of people, 800 people to protect me there, there's something unbalanced between my rights and my obligations, no?
On the other hand, there's a larger number of people who would like to go there, but the government doesn't let them. The reason there's such a small number there is that the government...
No. The big number is in Kiryat Arba, up on the hill, where there have been about 40,000 Jews been living there for the last 30 years. And they live there very nicely, and they keep expanding. Have you been there?
Yes.
Where these people are? They're sitting ducks. And they sit there because they want to provoke the Arabs. And there's a point at which, my right sometimes becomes a provocation and violation of your rights. And it's part of politics, practical politics, to avoid these things if it becomes as costly as that military presence. The same thing with Gaza. There were, how many settlers were there in Gush Khatib? 2,000?
9,000.
9,000? How many soldiers were there? I mean,
But then if you're at war with somebody,
listen, I'd like to drive a V8 Mercedes, but I don't have the money. So I drive a rented Impala. Okay? Now you say, my God-given right is to drive a Mercedes. But I can't. I can't afford it. I'd be stupid to rack up a huge debt to buy that car. You know.
I guess the question is what issues are worth fighting about and what issues are worth
not my
surrendering
sitting
for.
in Hebron and pissing off these Arabs that live around me.
But on the other hand, if Israel withdraws, does that tell the Arabs, well, we can run them out of this place so we can ultimately run them out of Tel Aviv?
No, it doesn't work that way. If I leave in an untenable position, which is unsafe, which costs me a lot of soldiers to deploy, and which provokes the Arab surrounding, and if I leave there, that does not mean I'm not going to defend my central interests, like defending the core area of Tel Aviv, which is the core of Israel, which is around Tel Aviv. That's not the way it works.
But every time there's a retreat, and the Arabs said specifically, when Israel left Gaza, they said, it was our terrorism that drove them out of Gaza, and now that we prove that our terrorism can drive them out of Gaza, we're going to keep using terrorism to drive. Every time Israel loses any place, every time there's a retreat, the Arabs become bolder and more convinced that they can get it all.
Because if the Arabs became bolder and bolder, the Egyptians and the Jordanians would not maintain the peace.
So you think the...
Have they been emboldened? I mean, is Egypt rattling its saber because they left Gaza? Listen, Arabs are not crazy. They look at the military balance. They look at something that says the Israelis have more tanks than the French and the Germans together. They have a larger air force than either France or Germany. They have about, several hundred nuclear weapons. They have an invulnerable deterrent. Part of it is at sea, submarines, part of it is on airplanes, part of it medium-range rockets, etc., etc.
But there's also a psychological factor. If Israel doesn't want to use all its weaponry because it thinks that it must ultimately live in peace with these people and it doesn't want to prejudice long-term peaceful relations, then...
so you think it's going to embolden them?
Well, apparently, I mean, that's what seems to be happening with the Arabs. There are daily shooting attacks on the roads, daily rocket throwing attacks.
Have you seen how much terrorism has gone down over the last 2 years?
A lot.
To about a level of less than 10%. That's good news.
In Israel, you mean?
I mean, it's cross-border terrorism. Like blowing up cafes and stuff. Since 2005.
Well, Israel has a deterrent. They have a security fence.
Yes.
But there's daily
Good
rocket
fences
attacks.
make good neighbors. Yes, it's true. And if they go on, and if they become insufferable, they'll go back into Gaza.
Now, where do you see this heading in, say, 20 or 30 years from now? What is the long-term solution? Are the Jews and the Arabs going to come to a peaceful resolution, or is there going to be a winner-take-all? Either Israel will be destroyed, or it will possess all of its entire ancestral homeland.
How far does that homeland go?
Generally considered west of the Jordan.
And how far north? Into Baalbek? Into Lebanon?
Well, we can discuss the borders, but like, for example, everything that Israel had after the Six-Day War, like the Golan Heights, for example. Small territory, but strategically important. When the Syrians had the Golan, all they used it for was shelling Jewish towns below.
Look, there's an old joke from the Independence War. These two guys are sitting in a foxhole and bullets whizzing overhead. And they're running out of ammo, and one says to the other, Moshe, if the Brits had to give us a country that's not theirs to give, why couldn't they have given us Switzerland? So they're not living in Switzerland. But in those 60 years, almost 60 years, look what happened to this country. There are now 6-7 million Jews there. It has a per capita income of $34,000 a year. It has, as I said, a larger tank and air force than Germany and France. It is the third most important investment locale for high-tech investment, and they hardly grow any oranges anymore.
So the economy is doing great.
Yeah, and the country is growing, and it's becoming richer, and it's becoming more powerful, and one after the two significant players, Arab players, have made peace with it. I mean, is this something to sneeze about?
But they're still taking daily rocket attacks, and the people in those towns are saying, where is our government?
Yeah.
Where is our army? Why do we allow
yes,
this?
True. Again, it's, you can, I can always find a little spot on your shirt. But basically, your shirt is pretty clean,
Hope so.
And so is your tie. And what's important is that your shirt is clean and not that there are a few spots. And you mustn't confuse the spots with the shirt.
Right. But there are some important decisions that do have to be made.
Yes?
Israel's current government is extremely unpopular, to put it mildly. If it's perceived as a big enough failure, if it's perceived as giving away too much and not getting enough in return, maybe there'll be a new government that's not so lenient.
So, and what do you think? So if let's assume Bibi Netanyahu goes back into business. He won't have to deal with the same realities that the Olmert government has to deal with, the same tactical and strategic issues, plus how to deal with the Europeans and the Americans and the Russians and the Iranians. You think he can just suddenly start a completely new game? And say, no, we're not going to budge, we're not going to give an inch. Will he have a more stable coalition than Olmert has? Do you remember how often Bibi Netanyahu his government has fallen? So I don't. Yes, it's a weak government. It's true.
So the question is, do you enhance your position by compromising and giving in, or do you enhance your position by having principles and sticking to them, even if you're under pressure?
You stick to principles where they matter, and you become flexible where it's tactical and where it doesn't matter for your survival, but might set in motion certain benign dynamic, which if you just kind of dig in, won't set in. That's what policy is all about. It's not a conversation like ours. It has to do with principles and realism, with flexibility and steadfastness, with using options when they are there rather than refusing them, testing the other side, but try not to test them in ways which can't be reversed, and see how the dynamic can be turned from malign to benign. Otherwise, there's no other way that we can live. We can't just live and say, tomorrow is going to be worse than today. Tomorrow is going to be worse than today, and day after tomorrow, we might just about commit suicide, right?
If someone is attacking you, let's say they're bigger and stronger than you are, and you think they're capable of killing you, so should you still fight back with all your might on the chance that you might defeat them, or should you say, well, I'm dead, so I'll just lie here?
If they prepare for an attack like in '67, you want to go first. Too bad that the Israelis didn't go first in '73. They knew exactly where the Egyptians were going to attack. They knew the time of the day. They knew how the Egyptians had changed the time of the day to get a more favorable position of the sun. And they thought they were arrogant enough, or maybe were too intimidated by the U.S., not to go first. That was a mistake.
Do you think that Israel's...
Was it correct then to have a separation of forces agreement? Yes, because that separation of forces agreement in '74 led to Sadat's trip to Jerusalem in '77.
And also his assassination later.
Meanwhile, despite the assassination, the peace is held.
Now, where does all this pressure come from? Many Israeli politicians, before they became prime minister, they said that they would never give up this and they would never give up that, and as soon as they became prime minister, they changed. Is there some invisible pressure that the media never reports about, which hits these people after they come to power?
No, but all of us, when we suddenly move from one position into a position of more responsibility, suddenly find that the rhetoric we spouted beforehand doesn't serve us anymore, as we now charged with the responsibility for more people than ourselves. and we suddenly realize there are other forces operating on us. And that's what we call responsibility, and that's what we call statesmanship. And you know, consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. Think about Sharon. He leaves Gaza. Think about Ben-Gurion, who grew up with the idea that all of Israel belonged to the Jews. He said, no, we're going to take half the loaf, and we will, if need be, we will fight Begin to assert our authority over the process. You know, politics is not about building sandcastles, let alone pies in the sky.
So where do we go from here? Let's say the United States says, well, we're going to wash our hands of this whole thing. This problem can't be solved. We'll just let them slug it out.
No, come on. We started this conversation with saying that this was the most important strategic arena in the world, and that the last surviving superpower has major interests in the area. It has many interests. One of these interests is to at least sterilize the Arab-Israeli conflict, to use that and envelop it in a realignment of forces where the U.S. builds a Sunni coalition against the interloper Iran. The United States is grabbing the opportunity of a realignment interest which kind of makes for a convergence of interests between the Sunni states and Israel. That's where we are, and that's where we're going to go until we hit a snag, and then we'll worry about that.